Hi everybody, FoxxC here again with a special Halloween episode of FoxxTales, and today I'm doing some entirely original content, which is reading you a short story that I wrote, and it's Halloweeny. This is one that I thought I had an original copy of that I wrote way back in high school, and I was just going to update it, and it turns out I didn't have a copy, so I just wrote it again on the same concept. And I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, so we're just gonna jump right in. So the story is called Pumpkin. The house seemed to grow right out of the lush garden on the corner of Ash and Vine, and all the children of Westcroft knew to stay away. Maybe it was how the sharp angles of the Victorian roof created a prickly silhouette against the sky. Maybe it was how the old fruit trees reached gnarled branches, finger-like and grasping, over the sidewalk. Maybe, like all the kids would whisper, it's because a witch lived there. A lithe orange cat was always prowling around the yard and perching on the fence, watching passerby with slitted eyes. The children would occasionally catch a glimpse of a woman through one of the windows, or perhaps sweeping the large wooden veranda from time to time, but they were quick to look away so as not to draw attention to themselves. In winter, the pathways were immaculately clear of snow, and not a single foot or paw print ever marred the pristine drifts that adorned every other inch of the roof and grounds. In springtime, nobody ever chased the last baseball that hopped over the road and through the ornate iron fence, even if that meant the game was over. In late summer, gaggles of school kids would pass the low stone wall of the garden, underneath apples that hung juicy and tempting above their heads. They would whisper and dare each other to jump up and snatch one of the fruits from under the watchful eyes of the lithe orange cat. They never did. They just knew, somehow, to stay away. Except for one day of the year. Halloween. On Halloween night, the house on the corner of Ash and Vine came even more alive. It glowed with a warm yellowish light that could be seen for blocks, while the scent of boiling sugar, popcorn, and cinnamon hung heavy in the misty evening air. The gates to the house would open into the garden at precisely 5 p.m. on All Hallows Eve, but the neighborhood kids never rushed in. They would eventually trickle in through the gate in nervous groups of 2 or 3, the youngest ones urged over their fear by patient parents, and into the garden. The bounty of fall adorned the winding path to the rear of the house, under the watchful eyes of several terrifying skeletal scarecrows. Bushels of corn and apples spilled over oaken barrels, promising more potent treats inside. The way was lit with lanterns filled with giant beeswax candles, the soothing balm of their scent mixed into the fragrant air, occasionally spiced by a whiff of orange or lemon oil. Each group of visitors was met by the lithe orange cat, who weaved its way about the garden, keeping a watchful eye on the proceedings, and disappearing, only to pop up, every now and then, with a startling meow. Those brave enough to reach the house, and most did, were rewarded with a wondrous sight. On the veranda, only a short flight of stairs from the garden path, was a table that groaned heavy with treats. Shiny candy apples with a roll of paper tucked in the core that told your fortune for the coming season, enormous popcorn balls dusted with cinnamon and nutmeg, ginger cookies shaped like bats and ghosts, miniature pumpkin tarts, and little bags full of roasted pumpkin seeds glazed with honey. Several cauldrons burbled over a fire built in a stone hearth against the wall of the house, and the scent of apples and spices wafted out. The affair was attended to by a graceful woman of indeterminate age and average height, and the house was, of course, her house. She was dressed in layers of grey and black and purple, with a jaunty pointed hat and fancy boots. Her name was Leanne Fielding, but everyone in town just knew her as Miss Leanne. And that's how they would address her. And always politely. She spent the evening cheerfully complimenting everyone's costumes, handing out her confections, and filling mugs of hot cider and a little extra something for the adults that warmed you right through with a heat that lasted for hours. To get to the treats, however, visitors had to face one last gauntlet. A row of the scariest, most hideous-looking jack-o'-lanterns anyone had ever seen. It was mostly the adults who would balk at this part. The haunting fear emanating from these terrible visages struck some of them cold, as though through some old familiarity. People always asked Miss Leanne how she carved such terrifying jack-o'-lanterns, and she would just giggle and say, "Oh, years of practice." And the lithe orange cat would pop up out of nowhere and go, "Meow," and get a scratch on its head from Miss Leanne. At any rate, everyone agreed that they were the greatest jack-o'-lanterns ever, and people came from miles around to see them. One Halloween, a particularly precocious 11-year-old, Riley Price, who was new to town and dressed like a pirate, had some questions for Miss Leanne. "Are you really a witch, like everyone says?" asked Riley. "Of course I am," replied Miss Leanne, and she handed Riley a popcorn ball, then turned her attention to a squad of pint-sized Ninja Turtles. "Is that the Johnson quadruplets? Cowabunga, dudes! High fives!" The kids giggled and high-fived Leanne. Riley took a bite out of the popcorn ball and glared, which was difficult because the popcorn ball was sticky and crunchy and eye-rollingly delicious. "Why don't you each grab a candy apple and I'll get your mum something warm to drink?" Leanne took the travel mug from a frazzled-looking Mrs. Johnson and filled it to the brim with her strongest cider. She then produced a small vial from somewhere in the layers of her clothes and slipped a few drops into the drink before handing the mug back. A bit of herbal remedy as well, she winked to Mrs. Johnson, who sighed with gratitude. "Well, if you were really a witch, then you'd be able to do magic, right?" interrupted Riley, through a second mouthful of popcorn ball. Miss Leanne feigned astonishment. "You don't think I can do magic?" she replied in a playfully hurt tone. "Seriously? Magic isn't real." "My goodness, you sound like an expert. But I think I want a second opinion. What do you think, Turtles? Is magic real?" The Johnson quadruplets all looked up together. "Oh yeah, yep, totally, of course." Miss Leanne smiled. "Ooh, that's 4 experts against 1. I think I'll have to side with magic being real." "What? But they're like 7!" protested Riley. 8.5, called one of the quadruplets as they made their way back down the steps with their candy apples. Riley scowled. They were alone for a moment on the veranda with Miss Leanne. "Can you prove it, though? Cast a spell or something?" "Fish swim, cats purr, witches make magic," shrugged Miss Leanne. "That's not an answer!" The popcorn ball was gone now, and Riley anxiously wiped sticky fingers on their costume. The lithe orange cat chose that moment to hop onto Leanne's shoulder. "Meow," it stared daggers at Riley, who backed up a step. Miss Leanne smiled softly and took a candy apple from the middle of the bunch. "Why don't you just enjoy the rest of Halloween? Magic doesn't just happen one night a year." She offered the apple to Riley, who managed to choke a retort into a mangled "thank you," took the apple, and beat a hasty retreat down the steps and out of the garden. Riley sat down across the street from the house and munched absently on the candy apple, as watching the flow of costumed revelers was much more interesting. No, magic couldn't be real. That's just kid stuff. Crunch. Riley took another bite of the apple. A group of older teens whipped by on bikes, tossing bottle rockets left and right. A few whistled directly at Leanne's house before veering off sharply and exploding with small pops above the sidewalk. Riley blinked. No way. That must have been a coincidence. They took another bite of the apple and recoiled at a strange texture. Riley spat out that mouthful and pulled a small roll of paper, complete with teeth marks, from the middle of the apple. The paper read, "You'll find it if you look hard enough." Oh, come on! Riley hurled the remainder of the candy apple towards the house, just as the teens on bikes came racing back through. Thwack! The sticky apple caught the lead cyclist right in the side of the head. The entire pack screeched to a halt and pointed in Riley's direction. Hey, you damn kid! Riley ran for it. From that day onward, Riley was obsessed. They checked out every book the library had on witches, even the creepy-looking adult ones from the non-fiction section, and put the house under surveillance. Well, as much as an 11-year-old with school, activities, and bedtimes can surveil something. Riley made sure to walk by every day on the way to and from school. Weekends were spent in the park reading, with a notepad and pencil right across the street from the house. Since there was almost nothing to observe, Riley also got pretty good at sketching trees. Almost nothing to observe, that is, except the lithe orange cat, who always seemed to be prowling the fence before and after school, or skulking in the bushes surrounding the park. It would stare at Riley with a sour look until the discomfort grew too much and they had to leave. What was worse, the cat started popping up in the most unlikely of places, like the schoolyard at lunchtime or the alley behind their house when Riley had to take the trash out after dinner. "Stop following me!" Riley shouted one night. "Meow," went the cat. Now, the problem with being an 11-year-old who starts arguments with cats and spends weekends reading alone in the park is that you attract attention from the kind of people who have too much free time and not enough manners. Freddie Robinson was that person in Riley's class, and it wasn't long until Freddie Robinson noticed that the new kid had a strange obsession. One afternoon, about a month before Halloween, Freddie cornered Riley in the park. "Hey, weirdo." Riley tried to move away, but Freddie blocked them in. "What do you want?" "Just to warn you," said Freddie. "About?" "What happened to the last kid who went nosing around the witch's house?" "Witches aren't real," retorted Riley. "Tell that to the last kid. All they could find was his sneakers." "Yeah, sure," said Riley sarcastically. "Well, if you don't believe in witches, then there's nothing stopping you from sneaking into her garden and grabbing a pumpkin." Riley hesitated, and a grin split Freddie's face. "I knew it! You actually believe in this stuff!" "I don't! I'm trying to prove it's fake! See?" Riley pulled a notebook from their bag. "Notes on Witchcraft" was scrawled on the cover in black Sharpie. Freddie grinned wider. Riley knew then that they made a mistake. "Then prove it by getting a witch's pumpkin for the school jack-o'-lantern contest." "I'm not going to steal for you." Freddie suddenly snatched the notebook out of Riley's hand. They'd call it a trade. "Give that back!" Freddie stepped back a few steps and flipped to a random page. "Witches, if they are real, seem like very misunderstood creatures," he read. "Wow, you've really gone off the deep end." Riley lunged for the book, but Freddie was ready. "Nice try, sucker, but no pumpkin, no notebook." "I'll tell a teacher." They were miles from school, and Riley knew it. Freddie smirked at the hollow threat. "Meet me in the alley near the school on jack-o'-lantern night with the witch's pumpkin, and I'll give you your precious notebook." Riley deflated, and Freddie strutted away. As he went, he called back, Don't worry, if witches aren't real, this should be a snap. He snapped his fingers and laughed obnoxiously. Riley slumped down to crouch in the bushes, seething and watching Freddy's retreating back. Then they turned to look toward the house. It was quiet, save for the lithe orange cat who was sunning itself on the stone wall and watching the park through slitted eyes. Riley shivered. The days until the school's jack-o'-lantern night dragged by. Riley pointedly avoided the house and instead spent restless hours pacing their room, trying to summon up the courage to venture into Miss Leanne's garden. Finally, on the last night before jack-o'-lantern night, Riley stuffed some supplies into a bag, lit a green candle for luck, and snuck out at midnight. The way to Miss Leanne's was easy. The town was asleep and oblivious to a black-clad child slipping quietly through the dark streets. Once Riley reached the house, they were relieved to find it dark as well. They looked around for the cat, and the coast seemed to be clear, so Riley opened the gate as quietly as they could. The well-oiled hinges moved silently, and Riley crept into the garden. After a few steps, they started to relax and snuck around to the back of the house. A flash of orange caught Riley's eye, and they froze. The cat! It came padding out of the darkness toward them, eyes wide in the dim moonlight. Riley moved swiftly to take a pouch of premium chicken and lobster dinner from their pocket, opened it, and dumped it out in front of the cat. Its sleek tail went straight up in the air when it smelled the cat food, and it tucked in hungrily. Riley did a silent fist pump and kept moving. The back garden was almost entirely dark, lit only by a quarter moon filtered through the clouds. This was a part of the house that Riley, in spite of their exhaustive surveillance, was unfamiliar with. No alley ran behind it, and the house blocked the view from the park. Riley moved slowly, scanning the rows of vegetables. There was some winter squash, but nothing the size and shape of a pumpkin. They sighed in frustration, but now wasn't the time to give up. Riley began searching along the fence to make sure they weren't buried in the foliage there. About halfway around the yard, Riley heard a sound coming from the house and lay down in the unsettlingly bare autumn garden as quietly as they could. A light came on the veranda, and Miss Leanne stepped out. Riley risked a peek. Leanne didn't seem to be looking for an intruder. Rather, she looked relaxed and expectant. The sound of footsteps came from the front of the house, behind Riley, but they were too scared to turn and look. They just tried not to breathe and hoped no one looked their way. The footsteps turned out to belong to a tall, black-clad figure with red, wavy, shoulder-length hair, softly handsome features, and just a little bit of curve. They strode up the steps and embraced Leanne, who greeted the guests warmly and led them inside by the hand. This must really be some witchy business, thought Riley, whose curiosity was piqued. Seriously, who has a meeting at the witching hour dressed like that? They watched a light ascend to the second floor, where it settled in a window. All thought of pumpkins totally forgotten, Riley got up as quietly as they could and made their way to the veranda, hopped up onto the railing, and used a lattice to reach the roof. Taking a moment to make sure they hadn't made too much noise during the climb, Riley scuttled along the roof to where the light was spilling out. As carefully as they could, they peered around the window frame. The room was small and sparsely furnished, save for a large table, some chairs, and a large wooden cabinet against the wall. Miss Leanne and her guests sat at the table sipping tea and chatting politely in quiet tones, too quiet to be heard through the thick glass. Riley frowned, disappointed. They'd expected at least some palm reading. Then the stranger put down their teacup and produced a colorful deck of cards. Riley's eyes shone. Tarot! They leaned in to get a better view. Meow! The lithe orange cat was right beside Riley, who startled badly. They slipped and began sliding off the roof above the veranda. They scrabbled for a handhold, missed the eave, and tumbled off the edge. The last thing Riley remembered thinking before hitting the ground was, "That rose bush is really gonna hurt." Riley came to in a dark room with a cold cloth on their eyes. The bed below them was so comfy, it took a moment to realize where they must be. Riley sucked in a sharp breath and tensed to sit up. "Easy, you've had a nasty fall." Miss Leanne's voice was soft and tender, as was the hand on Riley's shoulder holding them down. "Good thing you landed on a soft cedar hedge." Riley was confused. "I was falling into a rose bush," they mumbled. "Oh, you must have hit your head harder than I thought. Roses are on the other side of the house." "But, now, no buts. How's your head?" "It hurts," sulked Riley. "Well, you can spend the night here." "Well, you can spend the rest of the night here. No sense moving you yet. And, now that I know I don't have a dead child on my hands, what on earth were you doing on my roof at 1 a.m? The memories of the past few weeks came flooding back all at once, and Riley cringed with shame. Stuttering and awkward, Riley told Miss Leanne about Freddie and the notebook and the witch's pumpkin. When they came to the end of the tale and grew silent, Miss Leanne sighed. "Well, I wish you'd just come to me and asked. You kids are always so afraid of me for some reason." She chuckled knowingly. "There's not really any time for me to do anything for you now, though." "You mean I can't have a pumpkin?" Riley felt the weight of the cat jump onto the bed beside them, and then, paw by paw, settle onto their chest. "The only pumpkin I have around here is this cutie," said Miss Leanne. "I don't grow them in my garden." "I thought witches could grow anything." "Only if the conditions are right. This isn't a good place for pumpkin." Riley sighed. "So, where do you get pumpkins for your jack-o'-lanterns?" "Magic," replied Miss Leanne. "But really? How?" "I just told you." Riley shut up. They were a savvy enough tween to know when an adult was deliberately stonewalling them, for reasons. After a moment, Riley spoke again. "So what should I do?" Miss Leanne squeezed her shoulder. "Get a good night's sleep, meet this Freddie tomorrow, and get your book back." "But what if you won't give it to me?" "You can only ever control your own actions, but I've always found that if you act with integrity, you'll be rewarded." Riley groaned. What's that supposed to mean?" "It means sleep well." Riley heard the rustle of Miss Leanne getting up to go. "You look after Riley tonight, Pumpkin," she told the cat, who began to purr loudly. "How do you know?" "Shh!" Miss Leanne cut Riley off and shut the door with a click. The only sound that remained was the rhythmic purring of the lithe orange cat, the witch's only pumpkin. The next day seemed to rush at Riley. It seemed like no time at all before they were standing at the mouth of the alley near the school on jack-o'-lantern night. Riley could see the silhouette of a stocky kid hanging out near the other end of the alleyway. They made their way as casually as they could, sweaty hands jammed into jacket pockets. "Thought I asked you to bring a witch's pumpkin, weirdo." Riley winced momentarily, then stood up straight. "I went in there and looked. There aren't any pumpkins anywhere in that garden. She doesn't grow them. Can I have my notebook back?" Riley took a step toward Freddie and extended a hand. "What do I look like, a first grader? Of course she does. Everybody knows it. Where's my pumpkin?" Freddie's face was beginning to flush with annoyance. I told you, there are no pumpkins. There's a woman and a cat and some apple trees and some corn, but no pumpkins. I promise. So where do those jack-o'-lanterns come from, huh? Freddy was angry now and put his body fully between Riley and the nearest exit. Magic, said Riley, as cool as he could manage. Freddy guffawed and pulled the notebook from his pocket. Riley felt adrenaline start to surge and their knees began to shake. That's all she told me. Riley held their ground and tried to stay relaxed. Freddy turned and tossed the notebook into a nearby garbage can and produced a book of matches. Riley's eyes narrowed. You would dare. Freddy tried to light a match, but it went out. Riley snarled and charged at him. Freddy dodged the charge and threw Riley to the ground. Nice try, twerp. Fighting tears, Riley shot up from the ground and buried a fist in the belly of the bigger kid. Surprised by the blow, Freddy fell with a thud. Why, you... Freddy came up with a piece of broken fence post in his hand, steaming mad. A flash of orange suddenly raced past Riley and lunged into Freddy's face, hissing and spitting. Pumpkin? Riley cried, as Freddy dropped the piece of fence and tried to fend off the enraged cat. Freddy went down again and Riley grinned. You get him, Pumpkin! Meow! There was a blinding flash and Riley threw up their hands to shield their eyes. When the light faded, there was nothing left of Freddy but an empty pair of sneakers and one of the most terrifying jack-o'-lanterns anyone had ever seen. Riley smiled as Pumpkin brushed around their legs, purring. They got the notebook out of the trash can, rifled through it, nodded happily, and put it in their pocket. Then they picked up the sneakers and the jack-o'-lantern and headed towards the school. Riley was the last to arrive at jack-o'-lantern night. They dumped the empty sneakers unceremoniously on Freddie Robinson's vacant desk and sat down on the edge of the teacher's desk. No one was messing with Riley Price. Riley won the contest that night with a pumpkin that, everyone agreed, was one of the most terrifying jack-o'-lanterns they had ever seen. The end. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and I really hope you enjoyed my Halloween special this year. I've got another FoxxTales coming up. My next video essay is going really well. I'm kind of like midway through the script stage. And I'm really looking forward to some Halloween shenanigans, which is what I'm going to do over the next couple days. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Happy Halloween. Like, subscribe, leave a comment because that helps me out. And have a happy spooky day. Okay.